It's a spiritual. If you turn.
The next person I have here, I look at it this way: we have 650 MPs, and I suppose to get one who actually represents us is not bad going. No. So the only person that we've ever had to actually represent all of us is, of course, Andrew Bridgen. Andrew, here we go.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Before we start, could I ask you all please to switch your phones off before we get stuck in? It's great to be back at this venue once again to such an enthusiastic audience, and you should be happy. I can give you some good news. No, not just Trump as one. But no, you are lucky, because after over 14 years in Parliament, my experience tells me that you're very lucky people, because I can assure you, you've got the best politicians in this country money can buy. So I'm supposed to be talking about being elected a representative, something I'm very proud to have done for North West Leicestershire, a place I call my home, a place where my children went to school, I ran my business, the people I was brought up with. There's always a great, I think, double-edged sword for when you stand for election in somewhere that you're brought up in. Generally, the parties don't like it. They do not want people having loyalty to the people who vote for them, because that's not the way party politics works. They want you to have loyalty to the party. That's the way our politics works. And of course, the fact is, if you stand for election in your home area with the people you went to school with, if they don't vote for you, you have to move away, don't you? And that's what you have to do. But when I stood in 2010 in a seat which David Cameron had said was a no-hoper, I was the 83rd target seat. He'd already told me that he wasn't giving me any money, so I had to use my own money for the leaflets. And he told me that North West Leicestershire was a dump in front of constituents, well, prospective constituents in 2008. And I was a bit shocked by that. I think he thought I was some parachuted in candidate from outside. So I did have a word with him and said, David, if that's what you think, I said, what are you basing this on? He said, I went to Colville in 2005 with Michael Howard. He said, what a dump. I said, OK. I said, well, you realise that's on my postcode of where I live, Colville. So I said, well, if that's what you really think, it's best you don't ever come to North West Leicestershire ever again. And he was only the leader of the opposition at the time. But I mean, Cameron can keep his word sometimes. He never came to North West Leicestershire ever again. It took how I actually got into politics. Before I was in politics, I was running a very, very successful business in the constituency, and I had lots of friends who were small and medium-sized business people, and we all used to go to the pub on a Friday night. And every Friday night, it was always moan, 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 moan at the state of the country, the state of the area. We'd actually had a Labour council ever since North West Leicestershire had ever been formed in, I think, 83. And we had a Labour MP at the time. And it must have been, I think, just 1 pint of Marston's pedigree too many on a Friday night. And I said, I've had enough of this. Every Friday we come here, we're all moaning. You're all moaning about the state of the country. This is about 2005. I said, look, there's nobody else. We've got to do it ourselves. So we're all moaning. So if you stand for the council, and you stand, 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 and I'll stand for MP, and we'll just take over. And give them their due to a man and a woman of them in that pub. Every one of them said yes, and every one of them stood. And so we took over the local Conservative Association in North West Leicestershire, which was moribund. It got no money. I don't think they'd put a leaflet out since '97. And the leader of the so-called Conservative group on the council I think they had 5 councillors out of 38. And when I showed him the blue rosette, he said, "We don't wear those, Andrew. We sort of pretend we're independents and sort of get in that way." So I said, well, things are going to change, Richard. And I stood a full slate of candidates for the first time in the history of North West Leicestershire for the Conservative Party. I put all the money up for the leaflets, and we had the biggest swing in the country in the 2007 local elections and took Labour down to 5 councillors out of 38 in one night. And it took 9 years working with my friends, running the council, in Parliament, and we moved North West Leicestershire, which was always described as the poorest constituency in Leicestershire. Colville supposedly was the most deprived town in Leicestershire. 9 years later, before the 2019 election, North West Leicestershire has got the highest economic growth in the country. 1.2 jobs by the time we'd done 9 years of economic growth. 1.2 jobs in the constituency for every person of working age. We turned it into, because that had put pressure on wages, wages had gone up quite nicely. It was the only part, North West Leicestershire is the only part of Leicestershire that has above UK average salaries and household incomes. And because we'd built 800 new houses a year, and we invented the Building Beautiful that the government adopted a few years ago, we'd been doing it since 2012. We pioneered it, and I presented it in Parliament. It was adopted nationally. So we've been building high-quality communities. We kept the house prices at 30% below UK averages now. So house prices 30% below UK averages, 1.2 jobs in the constituency for everyone of working age, and average income, household income above UK averages. My constituents were in the sweet spot, weren't they? They could, and I'd sussed out that what they wanted to be, apparently to be happy, was they wanted to be able to get a job locally that paid decent wages, not unreasonable. But if they could get themselves a partner in the same situation, between them they could afford to buy a decent house in the constituency, pay the bills, pay the mortgage, go out on a Saturday night and hopefully have a week in Benidorm flying out of East Midlands Airport in my constituency. I don't think that's too much to ask, do you? No. And that's why North West Leicestershire in 2019 was the happiest place to live in the Midlands. I didn't come in the normal party route. I was actually selected in North West Leicestershire as the candidate by open primary. So the people of the constituency voted who they wanted to be the candidate for that election for the Conservative Party. It wasn't just a decision of the local association. It's interesting, after I got selected, they dropped that system, never used it again after that. So I wasn't a party lackey, I was there to represent the people of North West Leicestershire, and very soon after I was in Parliament, some of you have heard this story before, but one of my constituents was Michael Rudkin. He was the sub-postmaster at Ibstock Post Office. He had been elected to the chair of the Sub-Postmasters Federation for the whole of the UK, and he was telling me an unbelievable story in 2010, 2011 of how he'd uncovered that Fujitsu, who ran the Horizon system, were fiddling with the accounts, altering them to cover up mistakes, and all his members were getting prosecuted for shortfalls in their post offices. And mysteriously, the day that he inadvertently uncovered this, when he was invited to Fujitsu's headquarters at Bracknell, down south, they'd actually shown him this by accident, realised who he was, threw him out of the building, and he'd made his way home, thinking about what he'd seen, that all these prosecutions were false. And this was in 2008. He went to bed with his good lady Susan, who was running the post office in Ibstock still. And before they got out of bed in the morning, the post office inspectors were already knocking on the door and said that you're 44,000 short overnight. Now, I put it to you, is that a coincidence? It's quite a coincidence. There's a lot of coincidences about nowadays, aren't there? Have you noticed? Yeah. Especially if you have the jabs, there's a lot of coincidences. So, I fought for them for 14 years. proved that they were innocent, and we had that ITV docudrama that came out that vindicated everything that had been said last year. The sad thing is that everything that was in that drama I'd said in the Chamber of the House of Commons in 2014. It's all on the record. Nobody wanted... And I'd been to all the media and said, look, this is the biggest miscarriage of justice in history. I've got all the evidence. I've got the evidence from the Fujitsu whistleblowers who were in the room, who were altering all the accounts remotely without the knowledge of the sub-postmasters. This is beyond doubt that all those convictions are unsafe. It's going to be 1,000 people who've probably gone to prison, and thousands more will have paid money back they didn't really owe. And I went to the BBC and I went to ITV and made the docudrama many, many years later. I went to Channel 4, I went to Sky, I went to The Telegraph, I went to The Times. I did get a small article in The Express in 2015 about the injustice, and the journalist then got promoted to The Times, the Sunday Times, and I thought that when Caroline Wheeler went to The Times, we could really get to grips on this story, and when she went to that paper, she told me that she couldn't cover that story anymore. And the story died with her promotion to the tabloid press. Coincidence. So I also exposed, while I was an MP, the modern slavery in Leicester. Many, many thousands of people, a lot of them illegal migrants, were being paid £2 and £3 an hour, working in sweatshop conditions to feed into the fast fashion industry, and that was exposed. I opposed HS2 for 10 years, from the moment it was bought in, that it was going to be a white elephant, it was going to end up costing too much money. It was badly affecting North West Leicestershire, my constituency. But I told my constituency, this will never get built. Mysteriously, I'm actually the only MP who had to sell his house to HS2. And they did me for £500,000 less than the house owed me, and £360,000 less than I'd paid for it 5 years before when they bought it off me. And I can tell you now, there was never any intention to build that railway, and the whole thing, as you heard earlier, it was a land grab. They have bought people's farms and houses far cheaper than they ever could have got, and land that they never would have been able to buy, because it never would have been for sale. And it's even worse than dodgy valuers. I've explained how the whole system works and how they conned everybody up and down the track. When you have to sell your property, whether it's a factory, a field, or a house to HS2, they come to you and they give you a list of 10 valuers. It's 10 valuers of firms you might know. It might be Savills and Knight Frank, and some names you'll know and some names you won't. But they're all in London offices, so you don't know any of the people. And it's the same people for the whole of the UK. And of course, you choose one, and HS2 chooses one. They both come out and value whatever you've got to sell, or the one that got to buy off you. And if they're within 10%, they split the difference. Now, it seems fair, but it's not fair, because you look at the psychology of it. The chances of them ever working for you again are pretty slim, unless you own lots of properties along the line. So the moment you, at random, chose one of these 10 firms, they've got you. You've done all you can do for them, and they're going to get paid by HS2 to do a valuation. But HS2 gets to choose a valuer every single time. And all of those 10 want to be that valuer that HS2 chooses. Now, do you think HS2 chooses the valuer who puts the highest price in, or the lowest price in every time? So it's a race to the bottom, and that's how they've done it. And I had this out with the ministers, and I said, look, this is what you've done. I can see what you've done, and you did it to me, and you've done it to everybody along the line. You have defrauded people and not given them full value. And he said, oh, no, there's none of that. I said, well, in that case, you've had this scam going for 9 years now. You've been buying these properties 9 years on the same system. Show me, give me the figures. If it's all random, it's 10 valuers, you will have randomly chosen each of them 10% of the time, won't you? Because it's random. Just show me the figures. Show me which ones you used and how many times you used them. And they refused to release the figures, as they always do. That's because it's a scam. So when we had the 19 election, my majority had gone up from 7,500 in 2010 to 20,400. I actually got 63% of all the votes in the 19 election. And then 6 weeks later, the madness started with COVID-19. And I guess that's when I really annoyed my colleagues in Parliament. We're supposed to be able to speak without fear or favour. Speak without fear or favour. The problem is there's a lot of fear and a lot of favour. So they offered me in January 22. I was offered a bribe. I was offered anything I wanted to sell you out. To shut up about COVID and Plan B and the lockdowns and the masks and everything. And it was a senior person from Number 10 came to see me. It wasn't a politician, but it was a senior advisor. And he said, "What do you want? What do you want to shut up?" I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Well, you have to tell us what you want and we get it for you." And I said, "Well, what do you mean, what I want?" He said, "Well, you have to tell us what you want." I said, "Anything I want." He said, "Well, pretty much, yes." I said, "Oh." I said, "Is that the game we're playing?" And he said, "Yes, that's the game we're playing." I said, "In that case, I want the Prime Minister's resignation letter then. If that's the game we're playing." That was just after the Partygate scandal had broken, by the way. And he said, that was the one thing I couldn't have. So I said, "Well, I don't really want anything else, do I now?" Give him that. It took me another 6 months to get that, by the way. And on the doorsteps, a representative of the Rothschilds banking organisation in my constituency said to me that "I'm not voting for you, Andrew, because you've got rid of 3 of our prime ministers." And he meant their prime ministers. That's what he meant. And I did, because none of them were working for you. And I kept thinking, as an elected representative, trying to represent the best interests of my constituents and the country, that we're going to get a good Prime Minister, going to get one that was actually going to work for you. But we never get the choice of that, unfortunately. The evidence around the vaccine harms, the excess deaths, is there for anyone who wishes to see. And what we do know is that, what I know now is that you can say any lie you want to in the chamber of the House of Commons and you can get people to support you. But you stand and speak the truth, the unpalatable truth, and you are on your own. And after I spoke out in December 22 to stop the government from vaccinating the under 5s in this country, I knew I could do it on the 13th of December, but I knew I was going to get a massive backlash. And I'm not politically stupid. I know I need allies so that, I've got protection. And I went to all my old Brexit colleagues, and pretty much to a man and a woman, they said they agreed with me there was something not right about these vaccines. Some of them were severely vaccine-harmed people. Most of them said they would never take any more. Some of them said they got relatives who had taken them and were paralysed from the neck down. And not one of them was willing to stand with me. I do not know. They're clearly compromised. I don't know if they've been taken the offers that I was offered and refused. I know that I've had the threats. Maybe they've succumbed to that. Maybe they're being blackmailed. But I can assure you now, the current system we have of so-called representative democracy does not serve the people at all. And the sad thing is, what we're seeing is it's not working anywhere in the world. Hopefully until we had the election in America the other day, where things hopefully will change. I think we're banking a lot on Robert Kennedy Jr. What I will tell you is that when I was expelled from the Conservative Party for speaking out over the vaccines, I'd been an MP for 12 years. Not one of my colleagues in the House of Commons spoke to me and said, "Sorry to hear about it," or even sent me a text. But within an hour, I took a call from the presidential candidate, Robert Kennedy Jr. And he said some very, very nice things about me, and I'm willing to say some very nice things about him, because we're all relying, I'm afraid, on the Americans, and I'm hoping that the new world will come to the rescue of the old again. The truth is like a lion. We don't really have to protect it. It can look after itself. All we have to do, ladies and gentlemen, is set the truth free, set that lion free. And I think the disclosure that's going to come out of America over the next few months will be irresistible. And it's those same journalists in Parliament and outside who wouldn't write about the post office scandal 10 years ago, which would have cleared my constituents and many other people who were wrongly convicted. There's those same journalists who've had my press releases for years with all the scientific data backing it all up, saying that, you know, unequivocal evidence of vaccine harms, excess deaths. It's exactly those same people. They will not be able to resist the information that's going to come out of America. I think we need to pray for Trump and all of those around him, including Kennedy, because I think their lives are very much at risk. They're taking huge risks for us, and God must preserve them for the sake of humanity. Because what we're actually in is, we are in a war. Half the people, more than half the people in our country don't even realise the assault on our humanity that we're currently suffering. And it's not just the jabs, there's many other things that are being perpetrated against the people. What I can tell you is that, as a former elected representative, that the answer is not going to be heard on the chamber of the House of Commons. That's going to be the last place in our country that's going to admit to what's gone wrong and want to put it right. They are culpable. We are going to need to move to a new system. I think it's going to have to come from the bottom up. And it's people like you in meeting halls like this that are going to be the catalyst. You've got to gently, and the evidence is all there, and the evidence is going to come out, and it will. There are some people who will not believe any of it until they see it on the BBC. It's difficult for me because I stopped paying the TV licence quite a long time ago. But the people are waking up slowly, and we've got to be nice to them. Don't be a purist. If you weren't there at the beginning, you can't be trusted. We need them all to come over eventually, and it doesn't matter. The whole thing about the way we're being treated and fed, the rubbish we are on the mainstream media, is all to set us against each other. They want to set black people against white people, Muslims against Christians, gay against straight, men against women. Because while we're all arguing against ourselves, they're carrying out policies that are extremely detrimental to the lives of all of us. So we need to unite. We need to be one. I don't think, as we said earlier, it's not the politics of right and left anymore. That is the illusion of choice. There is a uniparty system in this country. The last election proved all of that. It doesn't matter whether you are formally on the right or on the left. These are the politics of right and wrong now, and it's about libertarians or having your freedoms against authoritarianism. The model they've chosen, the world's elites, who have corrupted all our elected parliaments and bought our politicians around the world, they've decided that they want the Chinese model of governance placed on the world. You've never voted for it, you haven't approved it, but that's what they want. That's what they've decided, and that's what they're heading towards. The world elites put $400 million of investment into China before the COVID pandemic, and another $500 billion during the pandemic. And they're using the scam of climate change and net zero to ensure that we have to shut all our manufacturing businesses down and move all those jobs and that business to China. We're currently in the situation where we've got the most expensive electricity in the world. If you're trying to run a manufacturing business in this country, your electricity is 5 times more expensive than China and 4.5 times more expensive than India. How can you compete on the world stage with that? It's completely unnecessary. But of course, the globalists who made those massive investments of almost $1 trillion in China, they're reaping the benefits of those investments as we make ourselves more and more uncompetitive. So we know what the problems are. The solution, long term, medium term, is you can't trust politicians. You cannot trust them. You can't trust the party system because it's eminently corruptible. Trump in America, I hope, has broken the mould by coming in as an outsider. The answer is we're going to have to move to a different system, a system that is representative democracy. If it's up to me, tomorrow I would get rid of the House of Lords straight away. They've done nothing. They've done nothing to protect the interests of the people whatsoever. They don't even stand for election. They can speak with absolute impunity on any touchy issues without fear, but they've said nothing. So they can go. We don't need 650 MPs. It's too many to watch. It's too many to watch. We could get away with at least half to start. So 325 MPs, double the size of the constituencies. Controversially, I would pay them more. I'd pay them more, but no outside interests allowed while you're an MP. And then I would let the Chamber of the House of Commons generate legislation, which would then be put to the people 4 times a year in a full referendum where you, the people, would be the final arbiter of our democracy. And you would vote and you'll have to get engaged in the process, because if you don't, look where we end up. You end up being tyranny. Now, democracy, the word democracy comes from the Old Greek, and demos is the people and kratos is the power. How powerful do you feel? How powerful do you feel? This is power of the people, is it? Really? And as I've said before, and I will pleased to say it again, you know, when the people are scared of the politicians, that is tyranny. And that's where we are now. What are they going to inflict on you next? But when the politicians are scared of the people, that's democracy. And that's where we need to get to. We need to get there fast. Thank you very much for listening to me. All right.